Whistleblowers are known as defenders of the truth, fighting back against the culture of corruption. The recent high-profile whistleblowing cases, such as that of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, have given us a glimpse of the often harsh realities that face those who are brave enough to expose the secrets that those in power would rather were kept hidden. So what do you do if you have information that you feel should be exposed? Who do you turn to? Well, to tell us a bit more about that, we're joined by Gavin MacFadyen, Director of the Centre for Investigative Journalism, but you're here today to talk to us about the new whistleblowing group in the UK.
We set up a whistleblowers group in Britain because whistleblowers have very little protection here. The law exists to nominally protect them, but it's very weak, and it means that whistleblowers are encouraged to deal with the problem inside their own company, inside their government agency, wherever it happens to be. And that exposes them immediately to possible retribution and victimization. Psychological pressures on whistleblowers are quite intense. They usually, surprisingly, lose their spouses. The husband or the wife leaves them because they can't take the pressure. The financial pressure of courts, police, is very great. And unless you have nothing, or you have a great deal to fight, if you're in the middle, it's very difficult. So to fight against a major opponent in a huge corporation, for example, is extremely difficult. They have unknown numbers of lawyers. They have millions of pounds to spend attacking you, and they will. They'll go after your private life. They'll go after all kinds of aspects of your life. They'll falsify the employment records to say that you were always a crazy person, even if you've just been promoted. They'll do all kinds of things to discredit you. And that's very hard for families to take. And they'll often go to the employers, your employers, and say, you've got this terrible, disreputable person working for you. And so the pressures are high. And so one of the first things they asked us was, when we asked them, what do you need? What would help you most? And they said, psychological help. Some kind of counseling, somebody to talk to, so we can vent our problems with them and get some advice. They lose their homes a lot. Just to do a couple days in court could cost you £15,000, which is more money than any working person really has here. So you can't fight very well. And there's no unions in a lot of areas of British life, so the union can't help you. So you're very much on your own, which is why we formed Whistleblowers UK, so that there'd be a collective group, like a trade union almost, to support whistleblowers by themselves. I'm the only person in it who's not actually a whistleblower. I mean, all the rest of them are all whistleblowers. Though I've worked as an investigative reporter, I've worked with whistleblowers for 35 years, and I've seen what's happened to so many of them. We had one whistleblower who helped me a great deal on a film in this country, and he was stabbed on the street and barely survived. And I felt after that we had a particular obligation to help these people.
UK whistleblowing laws are often heralded as some of the best, the top standard, but from what you've been describing, it sounds like there's really a very long way to go still.
A long way to go. The law was probably well intended, but it's very, very weak. Employers and the government did a great deal to take the teeth out of the law. What they do, in effect, is they suggest that you go to an outside regulator, but there are no outside regulators of any independence to go to. So you're stuck with going to somebody inside the company and reporting it, reporting what it is that concerns you. For example, corruption, unsafe conditions, chemical hazards, all kinds of things that will be very disturbing to people. So we have a real obligation to find some protective form that really works. Now, in Sweden, for example, there's a law there that says that if you don't whistleblow, you go to prison. That's strong enough. In other words, it encourages you to whistleblow. If you see something of social importance, something of undeniable public interest, then you have to fight to expose it. Similarly, the Americans have a law which means that if you save the government a lot of money because exposing tax evasion, the government will give you 10% of what they saved. So we have case after case after case now of whistleblowers in America receiving enormous sums of money. One woman received $131 million as 10% of what she saved the government in tax avoidance. So those things are encouraging to some whistleblowers. We don't believe in that here. We don't think that people ought to take money because it'll suggest that we're only doing this for the money.
Is there a culture in the UK of covering up?
It's a long time culture. It's one of the few things that you could say is uniquely British in a sense, that the idea that when the police kill somebody, nobody's ever convicted. There's been 1,000 deaths in police custody in this country in the last 20-odd years, and not one policeman, not one, has ever been convicted. It's always been covered up. There was a famous case in 2006 where a Brazilian electrician was shot to death by 7 ununiformed, plainclothes police in front of 40 horrified passengers on a tube. The De Menezes killing, it's quite a well-known killing here. And not one cop was even prosecuted, let alone convicted. And the woman who gave the command order to kill him was herself promoted, and she's now the head of all counterterrorism in Britain. That's how we define cover-up. So yes, the answer is yes.
How's your group going about taking on this culture?
Well, by encouraging whistleblowers with support, with legal support, so they're properly defended, and they can be properly look after their own interests in court, where they're psychologically supported so they're not alone, where there's a solidarity network where for example, we have a court accompanying service, so that when a whistleblower goes to court, another whistleblower from any group goes with them to hold their hand, to make sure they're not alone in there, facing a whole panel of lawyers on their own. We send somebody with them. It's usually a nurse, because we've got a lot of nurse whistleblowers, and they're the best we've got. They're fantastic.
Why is that?
Because it's a tough world, and they're the ones who do it for no money. They're paid badly, and so why should they tolerate the abusive conditions often many of them are subjected to? Those people are the ones who are the strongest and the toughest. And they stand behind our military people, they stand behind our financial people. When they go in court, there's usually a nurse with them or a doctor, somebody from our medical group who goes with them.
Gavin, you're an investigative journalist yourself. Often whistleblowers are the backbone of an investigation, but for people who don't know, just how vital are whistleblowers to investigations? Well,
first-hand witnesses, like documents, are critical to an investigative report that has any credibility. We have to work to the same standard as a lawyer in court. What we do, we have to be able to prove. And a whistleblower who's a first-hand witness, or who can take documents out, becomes very important in that process. We have one with us, a man named Ian Foxley. He's a lieutenant colonel in the British Army, it was. He was sent to Saudi Arabia to supervise a commercial arms deal worth over £1 billion. He got there and discovered there was hundreds of millions of pounds missing in these accounts. There was clear corruption going on, and he confronted them and barely got out alive from the country. It was quite an adventure. It was like a James Bond story, him getting out of the country in front of the Saudi secret police. They're pretty dreaded. You enter that system and you probably don't come out in one piece. And he was very lucky to get out. And he's been on the front page of newspapers now and all the rest, but he's a leading figure in our organization. And we have many people in the same place. So we've had a lot of experience with, as investigative reporters, with the centrality of their evidence.
To people out there who are watching at the moment, who are maybe thinking about whistleblowing, have information they want to expose, what would your advice be to them?
The main thing is to protect yourself and your family when you start. We tell people here very simply, if you're going to telephone somebody, don't do it from your office, don't do it from your home. If you want to send an email to a reporter or somebody else, don't do it from home. Don't do it from your office. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. Tell nobody. Act normally, so nobody suspects later on that it might have been you. So just to protect yourself so you're not in serious trouble later, go outside your main town to a small internet cafe which does not have a closed-circuit television camera. Make sure it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you've got 7 or 8 minutes to make a phone call or an email to the press. And then leave quickly and wait for them to contact you.
With high-profile cases like Julian Assange, and I know that you've covered that yourself very closely, it seems like the message is that the war on whistleblowing is gearing up.
Actually, strangely enough, it's quite the opposite. Because, first of all, courage is contagious. And Julian Assange is nothing if he's not courageous. And he's broken more stories, exposed more injustices, more crimes and mass murder, particularly by the American government, than anybody has ever done. And he's still around. He may be living an uncomfortable life in the Ecuadorian embassy, but he's still with us. And he'll get out of there. But what's more, not one person who's ever used WikiLeaks, not one person has ever been caught.
Let's talk about the media's role when it comes to whistleblowing. We've seen the response to Julian Assange. It's been very divided. Why do you think the media's message has been so confused?
Well, I think the media's also been hostile to Julian, and particularly The Guardian here and the New York Times. I mean, basically the establishment press, the liberal establishment press, if you can call it that, are probably the most critical, strangely enough. They're not supportive of people like Julian Assange or even some whistleblowers. Though Julian Assange gets their particular anger going, there's no doubt about that, because also he produces more stories in one afternoon than they've produced in 25 years. And that makes them very angry, because he's not a professional. He's not one of us. He's a strange Australian crazy man. And they are frightened by that. Because, by the way, it encourages others. And one of the interesting things about WikiLeaks is, far from it being suppressed, there are 33 new WikiLeaks all around the world. There's even one in Bulgaria. There's one in the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee in the United States for coal miners, to put out the truth about what happens in the coal mines. I mean, there's a lot of very interesting stuff going on, prompted by that. So far from being a discouraging thing, I think a lot of people are quite encouraged by what's going on. We certainly are.
For people watching, the idea of a whistleblower is often deep throat from the Watergate scandal, a shady figure that stays in the background. So can you explain and summarise why it's so important that we protect these people?
Because courage is contagious. And if they are not caught, that's an encouragement to everybody else. It's like any whistleblower anywhere. It's fear that prevents them. If we can reduce that fear, then more will come forward. So there'll be more investigative reporting, better and more in-depth and skeptical reporting. We'll learn more about governments and corporations that we need to know, that now is secret. The secret world is a dangerous world, and we're trying to pull some curtains and open the light and pour it on it. And that's what whistleblowing will do. And the more whistleblowers we have, the more light's going to come out.
Gavin MacFadyen, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.